The Chernobyl disaster is well known for its cover-ups and mysteries, and that extends to its documentation as well. The closest term in pop culture for what is now missing is lost media. And that is indeed what we have on our hands. Without further ado, here are just a few examples of lost media linking back to Chernobyl. On the night of the disaster, several microphones inside of Control Room 4 were recording the sounds of that night, with the audio translated onto magnetic tape. While the recordings would have likely stopped the moment of the explosion, when the power was knocked out, the physical tapes themselves would have survived. And they did. These tapes were confiscated by investigators after the accident, naturally, and would never be publicly released. Hearing these tapes would immediately clear up most of the debates on what happened in the control room that night. Myths tell of arguments despite eyewitnesses refuting it. Actually being able to hear the conversations that occurred that night would clear it up without any doubts left. Unfortunately, the tapes are now locked away in Moscow, if they still exist, and it is unlikely they will be digitized, certainly in the near future. While the chances of us hearing this lost media are slim, in recent years, some interesting information about the audio has surfaced, from a prominent source. Nikolai Steinberg, chair of the Soviet investigative commission that would eventually spawn INSAG 7 and debunk the propaganda narrative of the Chernobyl disaster, has made public several documents from his investigative work, including about these tapes. All of these documents can be found on the Chernobyl Critical blogspot, which is an incredibly detailed source on the lead up to the accident. Unfortunately for those of us who would hope that hearing the audio recordings from the control room would solve some unanswered questions, we would be disappointed. The microphone covering the most crucial section of the control room that night, the reactor section, had stopped recording audio. According to one of the senior members of the electrical shop, N. Beznos, the last quiet conversations heard from the microphone were between the 16th and 17th of April, more than a week before the explosion. After that, it is presumed that the microphone was completely obscured by dust. Quite curiously, even though we haven't heard it, this audio may contain a mystery in and of itself. According to the same documents provided by Nikolai Steinberg, there was a splice in the magnetic tape of one of these recordings at 1:23 a.m, less than a minute before the explosion. Apparently the cut was quite a sloppy job using an adhesive tape, and the amount of tape removed could not amount to more than 3 seconds. But that could be enough to remove a simple statement or even a very brief conversation. The more likely and plausible answer to the mystery, in my opinion, is that the initial 1986 investigators simply cut the tape at the part that was of interest to them, and the recording was rather hastily taped back together. In a similar way, the witness testimony from the people who died that night would also clear up many details. We know for a fact that many of the people in Moscow Hospital 6 were interviewed by KGB officials and other investigators, which were then stored for use in criminal proceedings, and not publicly released. In addition, operators were required to write explanatory notes for their actions when they left the stricken reactor and made their way towards the administration building, where their superiors had gathered in the bunker. Like the audio from the control room, getting our hands on these documents would help iron out the final mysteries surrounding this accident. For example, the events that ultimately led to the power drop down to 30 megawatts around midnight, less than an hour before the explosion, are unknown. The only witness still alive who actually saw these events is Yuri Tregub, and he has remained vague on the matter. even in SAG-7 and the Steinberg Commission, the two most important resources on the causes of the explosion don't detail this significant information. If we had explanations from Toptonov, perhaps it would explain what went down at that reactor port. Yet again, Nikolai Steinberg has helped find some of this lost media. Alongside the previously mentioned documents relating to the control room audio, he also published a number of these missing interviews. This includes several KGB interrogations of Gennady Metlenko, not a control room operator but one of the people brought in to supervise the turbine rundown experiment. It also includes similar interrogation of Nikolai Fomin, the chief engineer from June of 1986. And then there are the explanatory notes. These documents, written on April 26, 1986, feature eyewitness testimony of the build-up to the explosion and the initial actions of these people after. There are so many people to read about here, and I strongly recommend doing so, as I can't do it justice in this small section of the video. Perhaps I will in the future, but for now I can't think of a better compilation of witnesses to the event from so many different places in the building. As I have said multiple times, the famous video claiming to show Chernobyl the morning after the disaster was not actually filmed on April 26th, and it wasn't filmed by the supposed videographer, Igor Kostin. I've covered this in more detail in a couple other videos, but all you need to know for this is that the video was actually filmed on the evening of April 28th by Konstantin Polushkin. This is confirmed by Valentin Fedyalenko in his article recounting his experience in 2010. While discussing this, he also mentions something equally curious. Apparently, on April 27th, when he arrived in Pripyat that evening, he was shown a video that Polushkin recorded from a helicopter. This obviously provides quite a bit of a problem. Either the video magically time-travelled itself, or another one was recorded, either on April 26th, or quite early on April 27th. If it was the 26th, which is more likely, then this would have been one of the first flights over Chernobyl, and the one in which Anatoly Razgazov took the first photo of the disaster. If this video did exist, it would be the first confirmed footage post-accident. There is also the possibility Fedyalenko is mistaken. Unfortunately, Polushkin has not been so forthcoming about this possible first flight footage. Fedyalenko previously asked Polushkin about his experience, and his response was, quote, "Go to hell. I've forgotten everything and don't want to remember anything. And I don't advise you to, either." End quote. In July of 1987, 6 defendants were put on trial for their role in the Chernobyl disaster. Following the natural secrecy of the Soviet Union, and to protect state interests, the Soviets had most of this trial behind closed doors. Only on the first and last days of the trial were the press invited into the courtroom, which was in fact a hall in the House of Culture at the town of Chernobyl, a few kilometres south of the nuclear power plant. As a result of this secrecy, if you look into newspapers at the time, you would be hard-pressed to find any actual details of the trial. And as for those who were permitted to see the entire courtroom drama as it unfolded, they were subject to harsh measures as well. Note-taking was forbidden, and any that were taken were simply confiscated. It is unknown whether any films of these events, or audio recordings, were made, aside from the first and last day of the trial. Curiously, the Deputy Chief Engineer for Nuclear Safety at Chernobyl when the disaster occurred, Nikolai Karpan, did in fact present his own transcript of the trial, including statements from the defence and witnesses, which appear in 2 of his books, Revenge of the Peaceful Atom and From Chernobyl to Fukushima. We know he was at the trial because he is in fact one of these witnesses, meaning he wouldn't be presenting this testimony if he thought it misrepresented what was said over those days. Alas, Karpan never said where he got these documents from, if he made them, or someone else. There was some 25 minutes of footage from the trial that appeared in Roland Sergeyenko's documentary, Don't Ask for Whom the Bell Tolls, with a very grainy, poor quality tape of the last day of the trial. The defendants, one by one, just go over their pleas, with Dyatlov getting into an argument with the judge, and then they're promptly all found guilty and taken away to serve their sentences. Quite frustratingly, the video here does not align word for word with the transcript that Karpan presented. So, frustratingly, it's simply a summary of what was said. As for the rest of the trial, it was widely assumed that any meaningful amount of it had been lost forever. This was the case until a few weeks ago, when David01, who runs the Chernobyl Revisited YouTube channel, uploaded a 50-minute long video of the trial. This footage appears to be the same source as what was used in Chernobyl 2 Colours of Time, a 3-part series which, in my opinion, might be the greatest documentary about the disaster of all time, certainly among the greats, and containing higher quality footage than the same clips that appear in the Telecon Studio videos. Anyway, according to David, this footage was found by searching some archives in Ukraine, turning up 2 tapes. Part of the footage had been filmed over with other Chernobyl footage, which David hasn't uploaded yet, but largely appears to be things already publicly available. Anyway, I'll give a quick summary of the events shown. Essentially, the 6 defendants are in their place at the docket. There's a few pans across to them and the attendants, being the international press, scientists, and some workers from the nuclear power plant. The judge, Raymond Bryce, enters and the trial begins. After brief information from the defendants about their name, their home address, etc., this as yet unidentified man on the prosecutor side launches into a terrible narration of the lead up to the disaster, where he basically throws everyone under the bus. At this point, I feel the need to apologise to Craig Mazin regarding my commentary on HBO. I've previously criticised the show for depicting a warped version of the events that unfolded in the control room, but as it turns out, Episode 5 is a near-perfect depiction of how the propaganda narrative was depicted at the trial, including the reference to the graphite displacers. The only difference is that this reference was welcomed at the trial, as the focus remained on the operators pushing the reactor to its limits, headed by Dyatlov being a brute, and negligence for everyone else at the scene. As we now know, this narrative is entirely fictional, and yet it appears in 1987 and 2019, almost verbatim. It's funny how these things work, isn't it? I will eventually cover this tape and this narrative in more detail, as it is a goldmine of how the Soviet propaganda machine worked to ensure that the operators and their superiors would always be guilty in the court of public opinion, regardless of whatever information would eventually come out. Eventually, the trial cuts out midway through this man's speech, leaving the rest of the first day of the trial a complete mystery. Whatever was said doesn't align with what appears in Karpan's testimony directly, so we can only get general ideas. And as for the rest of the trial, we simply have no idea what, if any, was possibly recorded. The theory that an earthquake caused the Chernobyl disaster is an old and discredited theory, but it is a theory nonetheless. In my video covering this theory, I neglected to mention one key detail. Did you know that there is an award-winning lost documentary that seeks to explore this theory and run with it? This is the Danish documentary film The Secret Factor, which I have been searching for literal years. Directed and produced by Bente Milton, this documentary could be a goldmine of information, as the description on Milton's site claims it contains suppressed statements from the workers, KGB documents, and footage from inside the sarcophagus. As anyone who has looked at my channel knows, I love all three of those things. The documentary is also very clearly a product of its time. The second line of the description on the website is literally, to this day, the official explanation of the Chernobyl disaster has been human error and negligence. It then goes on to discuss how apparently the nuclear power plant was built near a geological fault line, and many other reactors in Europe are as well. It's not the best theory, given we now understand the positive Scram effect, but it won a prize, so who am I to judge? Wait, it came out in 1997? 5 years after the positive Scram effect was published in the West? Oh dear. This 1-hour documentary is then followed up by a second 1-hour documentary, called Russian Roulette, which is starting to feel like a YouTube clickbait title. Anyway, this documentary pivots away from Chernobyl and focuses on the Ignalina nuclear power plant. A lot less is known about this documentary as the description is vague, but it is apparently based on a former Soviet whistleblower, possibly from the Ministry of Media Machine Building, basically spilling his guts on serious safety issues at Ignalina. This could be geological or general reactor design issues, but this wouldn't matter for long anyway, as both reactors would be shut down in 2004 and 2009 due to pressure from the European Union. This documentary probably mentions more earthquakes, but we cannot say for sure. And finally, the one that interests me by far the most, the last one in the trilogy, Chernobyl Cover-Up. With a title like that, it has to be a fun documentary. Apparently, there are both 58 and 30-minute cuts of this documentary as well. So I'm curious what they decided was worth omitting in the condensed version. Anyway, the description begins with the G7 earmarking hundreds of millions for the construction of the new safe confinement, which will be used to dismantle the old sarcophagus and remove the radioactive material inside the core. It then swings to Konstantin Chercherov, a prominent worker inside the sarcophagus, who long maintained that almost all of the fuel was blown out of the building during the explosion. I'll do a video covering his theory in the future, but basically the entire core winds out being propelled out of the reactor, like a rocket. This theory is supported by German physicist Sebastian Flugbeil, and the two make an expedition into the sarcophagus to analyse the corium masses presumably, and estimate the fuel content within them. Regardless of your opinion on the theories involved, airing these documentaries is important for two reasons. First of all, seeing these opposing views can help open discussions on the topic, bringing people into the conversation, which is important for researching and understanding this disaster. And secondly, there's a lot of information that is apparently in these documentaries that we have not seen. KGB documents, eyewitness reports, videos inside the sarcophagus. This is stuff that should be publicly available. As of today, these 3 documentaries are lost.